Some things are just objects until they start whispering back. You've heard the stories, dolls that move on their own, paintings that seem to watch you, jewelry that brings death to anyone who wears it. But what if I told you, these aren't just myths? Tonight we uncover the truth behind the most cursed objects in history, items so haunted that just being near them can bring ruin. Some are locked away, never to be touched again. Others, they're still out there, waiting. But before we begin, if you're watching this alone in the dark, you might want to turn on a light. Trust me, our first cursed object is something you might have seen on eBay. Yes, the very place you buy your late-night impulse purchases. But unlike your questionable Amazon orders, this one could cost you more than just money. The Dybbuk box. Legend says this old wine cabinet is possessed by a malicious spirit, a Dybbuk, an entity from Jewish folklore, known for attaching itself to the living and bringing them untold suffering. The first recorded owner, a man named Kevin Mannis, bought it at an estate sale. Strange things began happening immediately. He and those who came into contact with the box experienced terrifying nightmares, sudden illnesses, and even violent attacks. Kevin himself once found his shop completely ransacked, as if something unseen had torn through it in a fit of rage. And then there's the case of Jason Haxton, the museum director who later acquired the box. He reported horrific visions, unexplained bleeding, and even the feeling of being choked in his sleep. Eventually, he had to bury the box in a secret location just to escape its torment. But here's the twist. No one knows if it's truly buried or if someone has already dug it up. And that brings us to another object with an even deadlier reputation. Most dolls are meant to bring comfort, a childhood companion to whisper secrets to at night. But what if that doll whispered back? You might have seen Annabelle in the Conjuring movies, locked behind glass, her lifeless porcelain face a warning of something much darker. But here's the truth. Hollywood's version of Annabelle is far less terrifying than the real thing. The real Annabelle isn't made of porcelain. She isn't elegantly sinister. She's a Raggedy Ann doll, soft, simple, and deceptively innocent. And yet she's one of the most feared, cursed objects in the world. But how did this ordinary doll become an object of terror? The story begins in 1970 with an unsuspecting young woman in a series of events that would change her life forever. In the early 1970s, a young nursing student named Donna received a gift from her mother. It was a used Raggedy Ann doll purchased from a local hobby store. At first, Donna thought nothing of it. She placed the doll on her bed in the small apartment she shared with her roommate, Angie, and continued on with her life. But soon the doll started to move. At first it was subtle. Donna would leave Annabelle in one position, only to return home and find her slightly shifted. A hand repositioned, a leg bent differently. Then the movements became impossible to ignore. Annabelle would be found in an entirely different room. Doors closed, no one home. Donna and Angie started testing themselves, making sure they weren't just imagining things. They'd place Annabelle carefully on the couch before leaving, only to find her back on Donna's bed when they returned. It wasn't just movement, it was intelligence. The fear deepened when the girls began finding handwritten notes around the apartment. The notes were scribbled in childlike handwriting, written in what looked like parchment paper, paper they had never seen before in their home. Each note contained a simple, chilling message. Help me. Help Lou. Lou was Donna's friend, a frequent visitor to the apartment. At first they laughed it off as a prank, someone sneaking in to scare them. But the handwriting was eerily small, and there was no sign of forced entry. Then, one night, things escalated. Lou never liked Annabelle. He always had a bad feeling about the doll, insisting that something was wrong with it. He warned Donna to get rid of it. One evening, while staying over at the apartment, Lou awoke suddenly. A heavy silence filled the room. He had the unmistakable feeling of being watched. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Annabelle. The doll sat at the foot of his bed, Frozen in place, Lou watched in horror as the doll slowly began to move. Before he could react, an invisible force pushed him down, paralyzing his body. He gasped for air as an unseen hand pressed against his throat, choking him. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the pressure lifted. Lou jumped from the bed, heart pounding, gasping for breath. The doll remained lifeless, staring back at him. But the attack wasn't over. The next day, as Lou and Angie examined Annabelle, Lou felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest. He lifted his shirt, revealing deep, bloody scratches, claw-like marks that burned as if they had been made by something inhuman. The wounds healed quickly, too quickly. Within 2 days, the marks were completely gone. It was as if they had never existed. But Lou knew the truth. Something inside that doll had tried to kill him. That was the final straw. Terrified, Donna and Angie reached out to a priest, who in turn contacted renowned paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens arrived and quickly determined that Annabelle was not just haunted, she was possessed. But here's where things get even more disturbing. Annabelle wasn't possessed by the spirit of a child, as Donna had once believed. The Warrens explained that dark entities sometimes pretend to be innocent spirits to earn trust. Once welcomed in, they grow stronger, feeding off fear until they can take full control. Annabelle, they said, was a vessel, a conduit for something much worse. The Warrens took the doll, knowing she could no longer remain in the apartment. But even in their care, Annabelle's curse continued. On their way back home, Ed and Lorraine placed Annabelle in the back seat of their car. But the moment they started driving, the car malfunctioned. Brakes failing, engine sputtering. It was as if something was trying to stop them from reaching their destination. The Warrens were forced to pull over. Ed took a vial of holy water, splashed it over Annabelle, and prayed. Only then did the car start working again. Annabelle was finally placed in a locked glass case in the Warrens Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut. A sign was placed on the glass. Warning, positively do not open. And yet, visitors who mocked Annabelle or ignored the warning claimed to experience terrible misfortune. One man, after laughing at the doll, crashed his motorcycle on his way home. Others have reported near-death experiences, illnesses, and terrifying nightmares. To this day, Annabelle remains locked away. But the question remains, does she ever truly rest? Some say her case has been mysteriously found open at times. Others claim to have seen her eyes shift slightly behind the glass. And then there was the rumor. In 2020, rumors spread that Annabelle had somehow escaped from her glass prison. Panic took over the internet, with people fearing that the cursed doll was loose in the world again. While the story turned out to be false, it served as a chilling reminder. Annabelle isn't just a story, she's real. And if she ever does escape, we may not be able to stop her this time. Would you dare stand in front of Annabelle's case? Would you be brave enough to look her in the eyes? Or do you already feel like something is watching you? And that brings us to another object with an even deadlier reputation. The Hope Diamond, a beautiful curse. They say diamonds are a girl's best friend, unless that diamond happens to be cursed. The Hope Diamond, a 45-carat deep blue gemstone, is one of the most famous and most feared gems in history. Estimated to be worth over $250 million, its value is nothing compared to the alleged price it exacts from its owners. The curse, sudden misfortune, tragedy, and even death. The legend traces back to 17th century India, where the diamond was said to have been stolen from a sacred statue. The thief, allegedly torn apart by wild dogs. Later, the gem passed into the hands of French King Louis VI and his wife Marie Antoinette, and we all know how their story ended, headless at the guillotine. Fast forward a few decades, and we find Evelyn Walsh McLean, an American socialite who purchased the diamond. She wore it proudly, dismissing the curse, until tragedy struck. Her son died in a car accident, Her husband left her for another woman, and she eventually lost everything. Coincidence? Maybe. But tell that to the long list of people who have suffered the same fate. Speaking of beautiful things hiding dark secrets, let's talk about a doll that should never, ever be played with. Robert the doll. Don't say his name. We've all heard of Annabelle, but there's another haunted doll whose story is even more terrifying. Meet Robert the doll. This creepy sailor-dressed figure once belonged to a boy named Robert Eugene Otto in the early 1900s. According to legend, Robert wasn't just a toy, he was alive. Neighbors swore they saw him moving in the windows when no one was home. The family claimed he whispered at night, and when things went wrong in the house, Robert always seemed to be at the center of it. Today, Robert the doll is locked inside a glass case in a museum in Key West, Florida. But if you ever visit, be careful. Visitors who mock Robert or take his photo without permission claim to experience car crashes, illnesses, and financial ruin. Some even mail letters to the museum begging Robert for forgiveness. So if you ever find yourself in front of Robert, be polite, and whatever you do, don't stare too long. The final cursed object, a painting that watches you. What if I told you there's a painting so disturbing that people refuse to keep it in their homes? It's called The Hands Resist Him. Painted by artist Bill Stoneham in 1972, this eerie portrait features a young boy standing beside a terrifying doll-like girl with ghostly hands pressing against the glass behind them. When it was put up for sale on eBay, the sellers warned that the painting was haunted. They claimed the figures in the artwork moved at night. Sometimes the boy disappeared from the canvas altogether. People who owned the painting reported nausea, dizziness, and even night terrors. Some even heard whispers coming from the frame. And then there were the fires. Despite its chilling reputation, The Hands Resist Him remains one of the most infamous cursed paintings of all time. And guess what? It still exists today. Would you dare hang it in your home? Now you might be thinking, these are just stories, right? Just myths? Maybe, or maybe, some objects really do carry something dark. Maybe some things are better left alone. But one thing is certain, people keep finding them, buying them, touching them, and every time they do, the curse continues. So the next time you come across an old abandoned doll, an antique mirror, or a mysterious painting at a thrift shop, maybe, just maybe, you should leave it right where it is, because you never know what might be watching. If you enjoyed diving into the dark side of history, make sure to subscribe for more terrifying stories. Until next time, sleep tight.